In this lesson, we'll be creating the shading network for the ground, as well as creating some pools of water that can be placed underneath the squid character. Alright, so here's where we left off in our previous lesson. So you can see now we pretty much have the body of our squid character finished. So before we start to work on any sort of displacements or anything like that, let's go ahead and start to get the shading in place for this floor. Alright, now as far as the shader goes for this, we can start with really any shader that we want. In my case, I'm probably going to start with an MIA material X. Alright, now the reason I'm going to use an X MIA material instead of the standard MIA material is because it's actually much easier to connect things like bump maps and normal maps to the MIAX and the MIAX passes. Alright, so let's take this and assign this to the ground. And let's start by just simply connecting in our texture into the diffuse port. So let's connect in the file, and we'll use the ground color. There we go, so take a look inside your textures directory, and we'll connect in the ground color map. There we go. Now you can see right now that this ground is very shiny if you take a look at the actual shader itself. So let's take a look at the reflection, and let's start to bring this reflection way down. And right now you can see that we do still have a pretty strong specular highlight, so let's take the glossiness, which is the overall blurriness, and let's start to drop this way down as well, so that way we have something that's a little bit more sandy in appearance. So let's also come in and start to add in a bump map for this. So we can either just simply create a texture or a simple file node. There we go, we'll drag this down, connect in the ground normal map. Excellent. And then we'll connect this up as either the standard or the overall bump. Really doesn't matter which one you choose. And then in the bump, we'll make sure that we have this set to be a tangent space normal map, since that's what we are working with here. There we go, and we'll just take this, connect it onto the floor, and let's see what we get. And you can see right away that this will now start to give us a little bit more of a sandy kind of appearance on the floor. Now starts to give him a little bit more of an environment to rest on. Now I do feel that this is a little bit too bright, so I'm just simply going to take my MIA material and start to bring the weight down a little bit, so that way we get a little less diffuse contribution, and overall that'll just start to darken our image just a little bit more. There we go, that seems to be a little bit better now. So before we wrap up the actual environment here, let's start to come in and just add a few quick little pools of water underneath this squid. You can see right now that really we do kind of have these two characters that are a little bit more aquatic. You know, something like a fish, something like a squid. Both of these belong in water, but there's really no water anywhere around. So we can start to add a few of these kind of liquid water elements very simply. So let's start by going to create, and we can create either a NURBS or a polygon plane. There we go. Now right now the plane gets dropped in right in the middle of my scene, so I'm just going to scale this out. Alright, so whenever you went through the sculpting process in ZBrush, you were able to kind of sculpt down some of these recessed areas, and we can just use some of those to kind of create this plane, and it kind of creates these little pools of water. So let's start by just creating the shading network for this. This will be a relatively simple one. Again, we'll start with an MIA material X. There we are, we'll drop that on. And for this, we'll start with the color at a fairly low value and the weight as well. With this color of the actual water, a lot of times water really doesn't have any color in and of itself. So a lot of the color that we see would come from a kind of a reflected environment. So let's start by just going back over here to our hyper shade over here. There we go. Now let's start to connect up a couple of quick maps here. Right now, if we were to just simply render this water would be perfectly still, which we really don't want. We want there to be a little bit of kind of a ripple in the water. So what we can do is go over to the Maya nodes, and if you don't have anything like Maya Unlimited, in which you would have the fluid effects available to you, we could use something as an alternative like the volume noise. This can be kind of a nice alternative to using the waves if you're just using something like Maya Complete. So let's double click on the volume noise, and let's start by changing the noise type to something like wispy. There we go. And if we were to just kind of zoom in on this, we can get a little bit better idea of exactly what kind of an effect we're starting to get here. So let's kind of make some adjustments to these. We can start by kind of increasing this ratio just a little bit. You can see how that will start to bring out some of these areas of black and white, just start to add a little bit more contrast in here. We can also start to kind of lower this frequency, and you can start to see how that gives us a little bit larger ripples in here, which is really kind of what we're going for. We can also start to increase things like this depth max, which will start to now give us a little bit more of a complicated pattern in here. There we go. And maybe just start to drop this frequency down just a little bit more. There we go, and you can start to see just very quickly how we can just kind of start to create some very, very rough, watery type appearances. So again, let's just middle click, drop this over into our MIA Material X, and again, you can connect this into either the overall or the standard bump. Really doesn't matter which one you choose. So you can see initially that the bump that we get is very, very pronounced. So let's take this bump depth and drop this way down, something like 0.1 to start with. There we go. So let's see what that does for us. Alright, so you'll see that once the render is complete that we do now start to have a little bit more of a kind of a ripple type pattern in the water here. Now you will notice that overall the water still seems very, very dark. So let's see if we can't come in and start to fix that. So let's select this ground plane, and let's go back to the reflection, and we'll start by bringing this reflectivity all the way up to 1. Now this by itself probably won't start to make the water as reflective as we would like, so what we'll probably also have to do is, inside this MIA material, take a look inside the BRDF, and start to increase this 0 degree reflection and 90 degree reflection. Usually what this material will do is give us the ability to change how reflective any kind of a surface is based on how directly we view it. So if we are viewing a surface very directly, as in looking straight at it, this will have a index of reflection of about 0.2, or a reflectivity level of 0.2. If we were to start to view this indirectly at about a 90 degree angle, we would get a reflection of roughly 1. Now in my case, since we are viewing this fairly indirectly, you can see that right now we would probably start to get a fairly low value of reflection. So let's start by increasing that quite a bit, and let's compare that to what we have now. And there we go, that's now quite a bit better than what we had before. You can see now that the water itself is now quite a bit more reflective. Now overall, the actual ripples in the water are a little bit too small for my particular taste or for my particular scene. So what I can do to fix that is to just go to this Place 3D texture, and you can see that that will actually select the 3D manipulator out in the middle of our viewport if we do have one of our manipulators selected. So let me just start by taking this, and I'll just enlarge this a little bit, and that should actually, as I scale this up, start to make the pattern itself a little bit larger as well. So that can start to give us a little bit larger ripples here in this water. So we can save this for comparison if we like, and re-render. Alright, there we go. Much better compared to what we had before, where the water just seemed a little bit too disturbed. Now this gives us something that's a little bit calmer in appearance. Now you will notice that the actual edges of the water, wherever the water touches the land, that we do start to get these very sharp edges. And that's really a problem with the land itself, just because the geometry count is fairly low, as you can see here. So in order to get around that, we could either subdivide this piece of geometry or turn this into a subdivision surface, or if you're using Maya 9 or higher, or rather Maya 2009 or higher, we could just simply use the smooth mesh preview and then render that out. So with the smooth mesh preview at 1, if I press 1 on my keyboard, you can see that's low res. If I press 2, that'll give us the high-res, smoothed version with the low-res cage on top. And if I press 3, that will now give me out the smoothed version. Now, this is a feature that has been around for the last couple of versions of Maya, but now, as of Maya 2009, whenever we use the smooth mesh preview to actually see the smooth mesh here in the viewport, that will now actually render as a smooth mesh as well. So for comparison, if I just save this and then re-render, you'll see now that the mesh is much, much smoother compared to what we had before. So really just kind of saves me the trouble having to go through any extra procedures as far as adding another smooth operator or converting to subdivision surfaces. I can just simply select the mesh, press 3, and then render again. So one of the things that you will notice, and this is something that we will start to address in our next lesson, is the fact that we do have this kind of a gray environment around our scene, and this is starting to provide the correct type of illumination that we would want. However, you've probably noticed that the water itself is now reflecting this gray environment, which we probably don't want. We would probably want it to reflect something a little bit more like a blue sky. So in our next lesson, we'll start to address how we can begin to introduce a little bit more of a blue sky into the environment and into the reflection without altering the overall lighting that we're getting with this gray environment. So we'll take a look at how we can start to work around that in our next lesson.